Have you ever felt like love was supposed to save you, but instead it broke you? You gave everything, your time, your attention, your energy, because you believed that's what a good man does. And yet, the more you gave, the more invisible you became. The warm, affectionate woman who once adored you started to withdraw, criticize, shift. Her silences became more powerful than her words. You began to shrink, not because you were weak, but because you were confused. What changed? Why does love feel more like walking on eggshells than coming home? If you've ever found yourself asking, "What did I do wrong?" when everything you did was out of love, this video will answer that question in a way no one else dares to. Because you're not just misunderstanding her, you're misunderstanding the game. Stay with me, because what I'm about to show you will make you see everything differently, not with bitterness, but with clarity. Let me tell you a quick story. David, a 34-year-old tech consultant in Seattle, once believed he had found the one. Her name was Julia. She was smart, sweet, emotionally expressive. In the beginning, every message she sent lit up his day, but over time, the glow faded. Not abruptly, but subtly. She started reacting more to what he didn't do, a forgotten text, a hobby he picked back up, friends she didn't quite vibe with. Her warmth became conditional, her affection unpredictable. And yet, he blamed himself. Is unfamiliar? If you've ever been David, questioning your worth, adjusting your life for someone else's moods, this video was made for you. Because you're not alone, and more importantly, you're not crazy. If you've ever found yourself in that story, comment "That's me" below. And don't forget to like and share this video. Someone else needs this wake-up call too. It started with a silence that didn't make sense. You texted her like usual, something simple, something kind, and she didn't reply. Not just for a few hours, but for a day. Then 2. When she finally did, her message was colder, shorter. You could feel the warmth draining from the space between you, and you told yourself, she's probably just busy. You excused it. You adjusted. You chased. But deep down, something cracked, because this wasn't how it began. At the start, her attention felt like sunlight. She laughed at your jokes. She leaned into your stories. She made you feel chosen, and you believed it. You needed to believe it, that someone like her could see someone like you and want it. David believed it too. He met Julia at a startup mixer in downtown Seattle. She wore a blue blazer, laughed like she meant it, and locked eyes like she already knew who he was. They talked for hours. The chemistry was effortless. Within weeks, they were inseparable. She told him he made her feel safe, seen, understood. She sent long texts at midnight. She planned trips around his schedule. She told him he was different from the others. But one morning, 3 months in, everything changed. No fight, no betrayal, just distance. A shift so subtle, it almost felt like his fault for noticing. Julia wasn't cold, just less warm. She wasn't cruel, just less curious. And David, like so many men before him, started doing more. More gifts, more checking in, more self-editing, less time with friends, less saying no, less being himself. Because when affection turns into performance, men don't rebel, they adapt. Not because they're weak, but because they were taught love is earned, not chosen. That the right man proves himself, that when she pulls away, you pull harder. But what if the problem isn't you, or even her? What if the problem is the story you believed about love itself? See, most men grow up absorbing a myth. That love is supposed to be transformative, that a good woman will complete you, that sacrifice equals virtue, and that if it's hard, it means it's real. So when the affection fades, when her eyes no longer sparkle the same, when your effort is met with silence, you don't leave, you double down. But what if what you're experiencing isn't love ending, it's illusion fading? David began to notice things, how Julia only praised him when he was useful, how her affection spiked right after he did something she liked, how disagreement made her withdraw, not dialogue, how he started anticipating her moods more than his own needs, and how, in trying to keep her close, he lost pieces of himself. The illusion of love isn't about faking emotion. It's about mistaking transaction for connection. When her warmth becomes the reward for compliance, you're not in a relationship. You're in a behavioral loop. She doesn't have to demand. She just has to approve. And you, unknowingly, start building your identity around her comfort. That's not love. That's domestication. And the worst part? You think you're still the man you were at the start, but you're not. You're quieter, smaller, less you. This is the beginning of waking up. It's painful, it's disorienting, but it's also powerful, because once you see the illusion, you can't unsee it. And when you stop performing for love, you start discovering who you are without it. So let me ask you this. When was the last time you felt fully yourself in a relationship? And what did you trade away for affection? Comment your story below, because naming it is the first step toward breaking it. You never noticed it at first, because there were no rules, no threats, no ultimatums. She never said, "Do this or I'll leave." Instead, she smiled when you acted the way she liked, and pulled away when you didn't. You thought you were making choices. You weren't. You were being conditioned. David didn't see it either, not at the beginning. Julia never told him to change. She never asked him to stop spending weekends with his friends, but she always seemed a little tired when he mentioned their names. She never said he had to cancel his gym membership, but every time he stayed after work to train, she'd send a vague "K" or "cool" and go silent for hours. It wasn't punishment. It wasn't overt. It was emotional weather. A shift in tone, a change in energy. And David, like most men raised to believe love is harmony, began adapting to keep the skies clear. He smiled more, agreed faster, questioned himself quicker, not because he was weak, but because he mistook emotional climate for emotional connection. See, the genius of this dynamic is that it hides in plain sight. No one can accuse her of being controlling. She never says, "You can't do that." She simply becomes distant, or not in the mood, or just a bit off today. And when a man's self-worth is tied to his partner's emotional state, he doesn't rebel. He regulates. So David stopped noticing what he wanted, and became an expert at predicting what Julia wanted. This isn't love, it's behavioral feedback. And the tragedy, it feels so damn personal. You think she's upset because of you, but often she's just reinforcing the pattern: reward when you comply, distance when you don't. And because the shifts are subtle, you start to believe you're the problem, that you're not attuned enough, that you need to listen better, that real love means changing more. But let me ask you something. If you can't be honest in love, what are you in? David began to realize he was in a loop. Every time he tried to reassert himself by saying no, by choosing differently, he wasn't met with dialogue. He was met with chill, with "it's fine," with a version of silence that wasn't neutral. It was loaded. He was being taught, not through conversation, but through consequence. This is how emotional conditioning works in relationships. Not through commands, but through climate. You're not told who to be, you're shaped into who you're allowed to be, and the more she conditions, the less you recognize yourself. David once said, "I miss who I was before this relationship, but I don't even know how to be that guy anymore." That's what happens when your choices are no longer yours, when your joy is dependent on her mood. When your identity is built around emotional barometers you don't control. This is not about blaming her. Many women don't even realize they're doing it. They've been conditioned to expect compliance as love. But until you see the pattern, you can't break it. Until you name the feedback loop, you'll keep mistaking obedience for connection. And until you reclaim your ability to disappoint someone, you'll never be free. So here's the question. When was the last time you disappointed someone and felt proud of it? Share that moment in the comments, not to justify it, but to reclaim it. She didn't manipulate you with cruelty. She did it with kindness, with warm touches, soft words, thoughtful gestures that always seemed to come right after you did something she liked. You never questioned it. Why would you? It felt good. But if you look closely, you'll see the pattern. Affection as reward, withdrawal as punishment, not love, conditioning. David remembers the first time he noticed it. Julia had this way of making ordinary moments feel sacred. She'd curl into him on the couch and whisper, "You're the only one who makes me feel this safe." It hit him like a drug. And the next day, when she casually mentioned she didn't love how much time he spent gaming, David quit without protest. It wasn't because she ordered him to, it was because he associated her warmth with his obedience. And the fear of losing that warmth felt like too much to risk. That's how sweet control works. It never shouts, it whispers right after you behave. When Julia wanted something changed, she never asked directly. She waited, monitored, adjusted her tone, became a little less enthusiastic, a little more distracted, and when David changed course, the sunshine returned. Most men never question this because they think she's being vulnerable. Isn't that a good thing? And yes, vulnerability is beautiful when it's genuine. But when vulnerability is timed, rehearsed, strategic, it becomes currency. Affection becomes a tool. Praise becomes a leash. And you become obedient in ways you never imagined. You stop sharing jokes she doesn't laugh at. You avoid topics she doesn't like. You shrink the parts of yourself that don't earn her glow. And when you catch yourself doing it, you justify it. I'm just being considerate. I don't want to upset her. This is compromise. But it's not. It's compliance disguised as connection. And the longer it continues, the harder it is to tell where you end and she begins. David used to love road trips, long drives, windows down, music blaring, but Julia hated aimless driving, said it made her anxious. So he stopped, sold the car, told himself it's not a big deal. But it was, because it wasn't about the car. It was about what it symbolized, one more thing he gave up to keep her happy. This kind of influence is dangerous because it feels good when you comply. You don't feel controlled, you feel chosen, and you mistake that glow for love when it's actually compliance-based approval. You've been taught that love is peace, harmony, alignment, but real love includes friction. It includes space for disagreement. It includes two full people, not one absorbing into the other. The woman who only gives affection when you obey isn't loving you. She's managing you. And the worst part, she may not even know she's doing it. Many women have been socialized to believe that withholding affection is their only leverage, that they must train their partners the way society trained them, to believe that approval is earned, not given. So they become masters at timing, smiles when you please, distance when you deviate, praise when you bend, coldness when you push back. It's not evil. It's inherited, but you don't have to inherit the role of obedient son in the relationship. You are not here to be trained. You are not here to be praised for shrinking. You are here to choose. To be loved not for what you perform, but for who you are, especially when you disagree. So here's your mirror moment. What part of yourself have you silenced just to keep the peace? Comment below the one thing you miss doing because it didn't fit the role she liked. That's the part of you that still wants to live. Love isn't a war, but modern dating, it often feels like psychological warfare, with no uniforms, no declarations, and no mercy. You're not fighting battles with words. You're navigating silent threats, emotional withdrawals, and the subtle but constant fear of doing something wrong. David didn't see it coming. He thought he was just being a good partner. He thought her sighs were harmless. Her "I'm fine" was real. Her mood swings were just stress from work. But then he met Connor, a co-worker who had just come out of a 7-year relationship. Over coffee, Connor described what David was experiencing, word for word: the inconsistency, the guilt, the constant second-guessing, the feeling that every choice had to be her approved. That's when it hit David. This wasn't a one-off experience. This was a pattern, and not just his. So many men are being conditioned through emotional currency, and the currency isn't love, it's control. Let's break it down. Phase 1. Emotional inflation. In the early stages, affection is abundant. Validation flows freely. You feel seen, praised, desired. You bond. You invest. Phase 2. Emotional scarcity. Subtly, the supply tightens. Compliments become rare. Affection becomes conditional. You start asking, what did I do wrong? Phase 3. Self-regulation begins. You alter behavior without being asked. You read her tone before you speak. You edit your truth to keep the peace. You think this is just what being a partner means. But it's not. It's conditioning. And you're at war without knowing it. This is how psychological influence works, not by domination, but by direction, not by threats, but by tension, not by force, but by withdrawal. The goal isn't your happiness, it's your compliance. The tactics. Guilt. If you really cared, you'd know what I need. Shame. I can't believe you think that's okay. Obligation. After everything I do for you. These aren't conversations. They're control mechanisms, and they're designed to make you question your instincts, apologize for your needs, and surrender your boundaries. David saw it clearly when Julia began reacting with sadness every time he made independent choices. A new project? I feel like I'm not your priority. Dinner with old friends? You're always choosing them over me. Spending time alone? Are you pulling away? Every action he took to be more himself was framed as a betrayal. That's not partnership. That's psychological warfare. And the most dangerous part, you start fighting yourself. You silence your needs before she even speaks. You feel guilty for wanting space. You start asking permission to be you. But real love doesn't require suppression. It doesn't demand negotiation of your identity. It doesn't turn your dreams into liabilities. David started noticing how his world had shrunk. Not because she took things away, but because he stopped reaching. And the scary truth? He blamed himself for it. This is the final tactic, internalized control. When she no longer needs to say anything, because your fear of her reaction is louder than her voice. That's how men become emotionally imprisoned, and that's why they stay. Because they don't see chains, they see love. So here's the question. What have you stopped doing? Not because she told you to, but because you feared how she'd react. Comment it below, not to shame yourself, but to start taking it back. You didn't fall in love. You fell into a mission to fix her, heal her, save her. You weren't just her partner. You were her therapist, her cheerleader, her emotional sponge. And a part of you felt proud of that, needed, useful, masculine. That's the trap. The savior complex isn't about her. It's about you and your addiction to being needed. David never realized it until much later. Julia had a hard past. Childhood trauma, a toxic ex, mental health struggles, and she didn't hide it. In fact, she shared it early. And David, compassionate, self-aware, emotionally literate, stepped up. He listened, supported, made excuses when she snapped, tolerated silent treatments, apologized for things he didn't do, just to keep her steady. He told himself, this is what love looks like. But what he was really saying was, this is how I prove my worth. You think your love will heal her, that if you're consistent enough, kind enough, selfless enough, she'll stop testing you. That one day she'll say, you're the one who finally saved me. But that day never comes, because her instability isn't a wound, it's a weapon. David began to notice the patterns. Every time he pulled back to take care of himself, she created chaos. A vague, "we need to talk." A cryptic text at 2 a.m. A sudden breakdown when he was on a work trip. And he kept responding, because he thought, she needs me. But what he didn't see is that he needed to be needed. That's the addiction. You're not loving her. You're validating yourself through her dysfunction. You feel strong because she's weak. You feel important because she's unstable. You feel loved because she clings. But it's not love. It's codependency dressed up as chivalry, and it keeps you stuck. Because as long as she's broken, you get to feel like a hero. But heroes don't build futures. They fight fires, and fires burn things down. David's moment of awakening came when Julia had another emotional episode, this time over a photo he liked on Instagram. She spiraled, accused him of betrayal, cried for hours, and he dropped everything to console her. Again. But this time, something inside him broke, not in rage, not in defeat, but in clarity. He saw the cycle, and for the first time he asked, what if I stop trying to save her and start saving myself? Because here's the truth no one tells you. The more you rescue her, the less she grows. The more you prioritize her emotions over your boundaries, the less she respects you. The more you become her emotional caretaker, the more she becomes your emotional captor. This dynamic isn't evil, it's unconscious, but it's still toxic. You don't owe anyone your identity in exchange for feeling important. So here's your turning point. Are you in love with her, or are you addicted to the feeling of being essential? Comment below the moment you realized you were more of a caretaker than a partner. That's when your healing begins. Everything changes the moment you stop reacting, not talking back, not explaining yourself, not chasing. Just silence, not passive silence. Powerful silence, the kind that says, I see what's happening, and I'm not playing anymore. David's turning point wasn't dramatic. There was no explosive fight, no walkout, no Hollywood moment. It was a quiet Wednesday night. Julia made a comment, sharp, subtle, designed to provoke, something about him being emotionally distant lately. But this time, he didn't defend himself. Didn't try to prove how much he cared. Didn't ask, are you okay? He just looked at her, nodded, and went back to his book. She stared at him, waited, pushed a little more. But David stayed still. And in that stillness, he reclaimed something sacred, his center. This is what breaking the spell looks like. It's not about confrontation, it's about refusal. Refusing to be manipulated, refusing to trade your peace for her approval, refusing to perform emotional CPR every time she spirals. When you stop reacting, you start seeing. You see how many of her moods were traps, how many concerns were cloaked criticisms, how many emotional storms were designed to keep you small, uncertain, obedient, and most importantly, you see how much of yourself you gave away just to keep the drama down. This isn't about revenge, it's about reality. Because once you stop feeding the chaos, you realize how much of it was artificially sustained. It only lived because you kept watering it, with attention, apology, explanation. Take that away, and it starves. David started practicing this new habit. Every time Julia tried to create tension, through sarcasm, silence, or passive aggression, he didn't rise to it. He stayed calm, still neutral. At first, she ramped up, accused him of being cold, tried guilt, then pity, then rage. But David didn't budge, because he wasn't playing defense anymore. He was reclaiming his energy. That's the shift. From reaction to observation, from defense to discernment, and the moment you stop reacting is the moment she realizes you're not the man she used to control. You're something else now, something unfamiliar, something sovereign. That doesn't mean cold. It doesn't mean cruel. It means present, calm, untouchable. You no longer need her emotional validation to feel whole. You're no longer a puppet pulled by strings of guilt and fear. And ironically, that's the version of you she might finally respect, or fear, or both. But by then it won't matter, because respect from others will no longer be your fuel. Self-respect will be. So here's your practice. Next time she pushes, passively or aggressively, don't respond. Not with anger, not with apology, just presence. Comment below. What's one pattern you'll stop reacting to this week? Let that be your line in the sand. Everything changes the moment you stop reacting, not talking back, not explaining yourself, not chasing. Just silence, not passive silence, powerful silence, the kind that says, I see what's happening, and I'm not playing anymore. David's turning point wasn't dramatic. There was no explosive fight, no walkout, no Hollywood moment. It was a quiet Wednesday night. Julia made a comment, sharp, subtle, designed to provoke, something about him being emotionally distant lately. But this time, he didn't defend himself, didn't try to prove how much he cared, didn't ask, "Are you okay?" He just looked at her, nodded, and went back to his book. She stared at him, waited, pushed a little more, but David stayed still. And in that stillness, he reclaimed something sacred, his center. This is what breaking the spell looks like. It's not about confrontation, it's about refusal. Refusing to be manipulated, refusing to trade your peace for her approval, refusing to perform emotional CPR every time she spirals. When you stop reacting, you start seeing. You see how many of her moods were traps, how many concerns were cloaked criticisms, how many emotional storms were designed to keep you small, uncertain, obedient, and most importantly, you see how much of yourself you gave away just to keep the drama down. This isn't about revenge, it's about reality. Because once you stop feeding the chaos, you realize how much of it was artificially sustained. It only lived because you kept watering it, with attention, apology, explanation. Take that away, and it starves. David started practicing this new habit. Every time Julia tried to create tension, through sarcasm, silence, or passive aggression, he didn't rise to it. He stayed calm, still neutral. At first, she ramped up, accused him of being cold, tried guilt, then pity, then rage. But David didn't budge, because he wasn't playing defense anymore. He was reclaiming his energy. That's the shift. From reaction to observation, from defense to discernment. And the moment you stop reacting is the moment she realizes you're not the man she used to control. You're something else now, something unfamiliar, something sovereign. That doesn't mean cold. It doesn't mean cruel. It means present, calm, untouchable. You no longer need her emotional validation to feel whole. You're no longer a puppet pulled by strings of guilt and fear. And ironically, that's the version of you she might finally respect, or fear, or both. But by then it won't matter, because respect from others will no longer be your fuel. Self-respect will be. So here's your practice. Next time she pushes, passively or aggressively, don't respond. Not with anger, not with apology, just presence. Comment below. What's one pattern you'll stop reacting to this week? Let that be your line in the sand. You've spent so long trying to earn love that you forgot how to live without it, but the moment you stop chasing her approval, you start chasing something else, something far more powerful, yourself. David didn't become sovereign overnight. He didn't wake up and suddenly feel whole. He had to rebuild, piece by piece, the version of himself he lost while performing for affection. And it started with something small. He went back to the gym, not because he wanted to look good for Julia, but because he remembered how strong he used to feel there. He didn't tell her, didn't post about it. He just showed up for him. Then he picked up his guitar again, the one he shelved because she said it was loud and pointless. He started writing songs, not for a crowd, just to hear his own voice. Then came the deeper things. He reconnected with friends. He traveled solo. He made peace with silence. And slowly, the emptiness began to shrink. not because someone filled it, but because he did. That's the rise of sovereignty, not loud, not flashy, but steady, quiet, relentless. Most men think becoming high value means making more money, building muscle, or dominating others. But real sovereignty isn't about superiority, it's about self-possession. Can you be alone and not feel lonely? Can you pursue goals without needing applause? Can you say no without guilt? Can you feel full in your own presence? David began asking himself better questions. What excites me? What do I want my life to look like? What kind of man am I when no one's watching? He stopped building himself for her eyes and started building for his own standards. This isn't about becoming cold. It's about becoming complete. Because a man who knows his value doesn't perform for love. He invites it on his terms, and that changes everything. The same things Julia once used to control him, tears, silence, mood shifts, no longer worked. Not because he stopped caring, but because he started caring about himself more. He didn't stop loving, he just stopped negotiating his identity to keep it. That's the secret. Sovereignty doesn't mean detachment, it means rootedness, so deeply grounded in who you are, that no storm can unseat you. David's eyes changed, his posture shifted. He no longer scanned rooms for approval, he walked into them knowing he belonged. And when you carry yourself like that, people notice. Not because you're trying, but because you're finally not. You're not selling yourself, you're not auditioning, you're not adjusting your brightness to match someone else's dimness. You've arrived. And your presence says, I don't need you to complete me, I'm already whole. So here's the challenge. What's one thing you stopped doing for yourself in order to please someone else? This week, reclaim it just for you. Then come back and tell us what changed. They always test you when you change, not because they're evil, but because they're uncertain. Uncertain if the new version of you is real or just another performance. David had changed. He wasn't reacting to Julia's moods anymore. Wasn't apologizing for wanting space. Wasn't jumping to fix emotions he didn't cause. He was still kind, still present, still honest. But he was no longer pliable. And Julia noticed. It started subtly. She commented that he seemed distant lately, asked if he still cared, brought up old memories, sweet ones, vulnerable ones. Then came the deeper moves, the sudden tears, the cold silences, the pointed, "You've changed." But David didn't flinch. He listened but didn't justify. He cared but didn't collapse. He let her emotion rise and pass, like weather. That's when the test truly began, because change isn't real until it's challenged, until you're provoked, misunderstood, baited, and you still choose your center. Old David would have jumped into fixer mode, would have smoothed things over, reassured her, adjusted. New David, he held space, not to manipulate, not to punish, but to honor himself. And it rattled her, because the man she used to shape was now immovable. This is what sovereignty triggers, a reaction. People who once controlled you with emotion will test your silence. People who once thrived on your compliance will probe your new boundaries. Not always consciously, but predictably, because your growth confronts their comfort. They don't want the old version of you back because it was better. They want it back because it was predictable. David didn't judge Julia for her reaction. He understood it. He even empathized with it. But he didn't surrender to it. Because the real test of transformation isn't how strong you are in isolation. It's how unwavering you are when your old world tries to pull you back, and it always will. You'll be tempted to soften, to explain, do just this once, your boundaries. But sovereignty doesn't beg to be understood. It simply is. David let Julia feel what she needed to feel. But he didn't let her feelings define his actions. And in that moment, something remarkable happened. He wasn't resisting her, he was respecting himself, not in opposition, but in alignment. Because real love isn't about bending to be accepted. It's about standing and still being chosen. So here's your checkpoint. What reaction from someone are you afraid of if you fully show up as the man you've become? Write it down, then let it go. Because if your growth offends them, they were never loving you, just your compliance. You won't recognize her at first, because she doesn't chase, she doesn't test, she doesn't play games. She simply shows up and stays. David met her 6 months after the breakup. Her name was Elise. They crossed paths at a leadership retreat outside of Portland. No sparks, no butterflies, just ease. She didn't flood him with affection, didn't overshare trauma on the first night, didn't probe his past to measure his wounds. She asked questions. She listened deeply. She smiled, not to please, but because she was genuinely enjoying herself. David noticed something strange after their third date. He hadn't once wondered what she was thinking when she went quiet. He didn't feel the need to win her over. He didn't feel like he was performing. He was just himself. That's the first sign of a woman who's done her work. She doesn't need your energy to stabilize hers. She doesn't create chaos to feel connection. She doesn't reward obedience with affection. She meets you where you are, and she brings her own calm. Elise didn't idolize David. She didn't need fixing. She didn't want saving. She wanted a partner. And because David had reclaimed himself, he could finally recognize her, not as a fantasy, but as a match. They disagreed on things. And it wasn't a crisis. She had boundaries, and so did he. There were no emotional power games, no withdrawal to punish, no overpraise to hook, just steady mutual alignment. Because when you've done the work to be whole, you stop looking for someone to fill your gaps. You look for someone who's already filled their own. And that kind of relationship, it doesn't feel like a roller coaster. It feels like a rhythm. David realized that for the first time in years, he wasn't anticipating emotional landmines. He wasn't filtering his joy. He wasn't shrinking his light. He was expanding. Because the right woman doesn't want to manage you. She wants to witness you. She doesn't test your sovereignty. She respects it. And in doing so, she reveals her own. This is the partnership most men never get to experience because they're too busy chasing the intensity of chaos, mistaking it for chemistry. But healthy love is a quiet revolution. It feels boring until you realize boredom was peace all along. So here's your mirror. Have you ever met a woman who made you feel more yourself, not less? If so, comment her name or the moment you knew, not because she completes you, but because she reminded you of the man you've become. This isn't about her, it never was. It's about you, finally becoming the man you were always meant to be. Not the one who performs, not the one who pleases, not the one who disappears to be loved, the one who stays, even when no one's watching. David's story didn't end with Elise. It didn't end with Julia either, because it was never about the women. It was about the shift, from emotional dependency to psychological sovereignty, from seeking love to embodying value, from asking, "Am I enough?" to knowing, "I already am." That's the sovereign love blueprint. It's not a set of dating tips. It's not a set of rules. It's a state of being, where you no longer chase validation, where you no longer confuse chaos with passion, where you no longer ask for permission to be yourself. You simply are. And because of that, your relationships change. Not because women change, but because your standard does. You no longer tolerate manipulation, covert or overt. You no longer trade peace for affection. You no longer sacrifice your identity for emotional crumbs. Instead, you attract a different kind of love, one rooted in choice, not need, respect, not reward, clarity, not confusion. David wakes up now and doesn't wonder how she's feeling before he checks in with himself. He doesn't walk on eggshells. He walks on purpose. He doesn't over-explain. He states. He doesn't adjust his light. He shines. And the women who enter his life now, they don't try to mold him. they meet him. That's what happens when you stop playing the role of the emotional servant, when you stop negotiating your worth, when you stop outsourcing your power. You become magnetic, not because you're chasing, but because you've stopped running from yourself. This is your invitation, not to be colder, not to be tougher, but to be truer. Because real love starts with you, not the illusion, not the fantasy, not the chase, but the choice to stand fully in who you are, without apology, without performance, without fear. So if you've made it this far, you're already different. You're already on the path. The question is, will you stay on it? Comment below. What's the one shift you've made that changed everything? Because someone else is still where you were, and your story might be the map that sets him free.